You're all welcome. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to our Debating the Global panel, which is focusing on the upcoming US elections and its implications for the world's global politics. I mean, previously within these talk series and the panel series Debating the Global, we extensively debated the issues which affect the global and the regional affairs, and then especially focusing on from security to education that Seyit Hüseyin Nas, Muhammad Eyüp, Michael Dillon, and Anna Devic has already spoken on those series. Today we will have a panel which is mostly focusing on the US presidential elections. You know, these elections is coming for 4 years, but now we are on the course of it, and then it will be next week. And today we have 4 speakers: the Yekta, İnci, Zülfikar. She will present she will speak about how does the U.S. presidential elections system works, and then we will continue with the historical background of the historical continuities of the U.S. presidential elections by Behlül Özkan, then continuing with the Richard Perez, that he will focusing on the social and economic policies of the current elections, the candidates. Then it's how the world politics will be affected by the U.S. elections that Hasan Kösebalaban will speak about. First, let's start with the Yekta. Before giving floor to Yekta, I just want to give a short biography of her. Yekta now is our MA student. This year she joined to our program, the Political Science and International Relations. Then previously she studied in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has a double major in International Studies and Political Science, and a minor in Islamic and the Middle Eastern Studies. Mostly, she is interested in the researching ethnic tensions and political systems in the Balkans and the Middle East, specifically focusing on the Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo in the Balkans, and Syria and Lebanon in the Middle East. It's mostly the comparative study she is working on. Now, floor is yours.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking all of the professors here for giving me this opportunity. It is a huge privilege to be on the same floor as these distinguished professors. I will be talking about how the U.S. presidential election system works. And so in order to do that, to begin, I would like to give a brief introduction to the government structure of the United States. The U.S. is a federal government. It has 3 branches: the legislative government, the legislative branch, which is made up of a bicameral Congress, meaning that there is a Senate and a House of Representatives. This is important because the Senate and the House of Representatives form the Electoral College, which I will get to later in my presentation. The Senate is made up of 100 senators, 2 from each state. The U.S. has 50 states, obviously. And the House of Representatives is made up of 435 representatives chosen in proportion to the population of the state. So, for example, California has had 53 and I think now has 55 representatives because it is the most populous state. Montana, despite its large size, only has 1 representative. Rhode Island, despite being a tiny state, has 2. The judicial branch of the government is made up of the Supreme Court, which has 9 judges appointed by the president, and it also contains the federal and district courts as well. And then, of course, most importantly, the executive branch, which is basically the president, who is the commander-in-chief of the military. He can veto legislative bills before they become law, also appoints members of cabinet, which is, of course, subject to Senate approval. The US is a constitutional republic, and in this case, you should keep in mind that republic versus that there's a distinction between republic and the Republican Party. These are not the same thing. For example, Turkey itself also is called officially the Republic of Turkey, or the Turkish Republic, whichever way you want to go. Republic basically means that it's just a form of government that in which the country is considered a public matter, and it's not the private affairs of rulers, and where offices of states are subsequently directly or indirectly elected or appointed rather than inherited. It is also a representative democracy, which is again important for the Electoral College issue that I'll be mentioning, because the representative democracy means that there are elected people who represent the citizens of the United States, basically. So to get to the Electoral College, this is the institution that officially elects the president and vice president of the United States every 4 years. There are 538 electors, which is the 100 senators and the 435 House of Representatives, plus three electors from the District of Columbia. So voters in each state and District of Columbia cast ballots selecting electors, pledged to presidential and vice presidential candidates. These electors are awarded on a winner-take-all basis to the candidate who wins the most votes in that state. Winner-take-all means that the single winner is the person with the most votes. They don't have to get the majority of votes, it's just that they have to cross a certain threshold, and then they're considered the winner. Technically, electors are not required by law to honor the pledge, the candidate that they're pledged to, but in the overwhelming majority of cases, they vote for the candidate to whom they are pledged. Each elector casts one vote for the president and one vote for the vice president, and there are critics who argue that the Electoral College is inherently undemocratic and that it gives swing states a disproportionate influence, which brings me to the next point in my presentation about swing states. Swing states are states where there is no single candidate or party that has an overwhelming support. This means that, so for example, the Republican Party sort of expects to win all of the southern states, so Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, these are all Republican, essentially these are all considered Republican states. And then, for example, California, Vermont, Massachusetts, Oregon, Hawaii, these are all Democratic states. So what happens is when the time comes for primary election season, so the Democratic Party doesn't spend much time in the states in which it expects to win. So sort of kind of bypasses California and Vermont, but it goes on to other states where it hopes to be able to get some more votes. Same vice versa for the Republican Party. Swing states, essentially, historically, swing states have been Ohio, Connecticut, Indiana, New Jersey, and as I was sort of doing some research for this presentation, it surprised me, but New York is also considered a swing state. I would have personally believed it to be pretty democratic, but apparently not. So, which then brings me to kind of the last important point of my presentation, which are primaries and caucuses, and the national conventions for both parties. Primaries are important because they are basically they're primary elections where people go and vote for the delegate that they're going to choose to send to the National Convention, who will then eventually pick the presidential candidate that will then eventually run for president of the United States. Primary elections are run by state and local governments, whereas caucuses are private events directly run by political parties themselves. So it's kind of like a bid to get people or get money, is what I understand from caucuses, honestly. So please do correct me if I'm wrong on that point, but that's what I've been able to get from what I saw during my time in North Carolina. And primary elections are usually indirect elections, and instead of voters directly selecting a particular person running for president, they determine how many delegates each party's national convention will receive from their respective states, and then these delegates in turn select their party's presidential nominee. Primary elections are primaries and caucuses. They usually run between January and June of the election year. So obviously 2012 from January until June, there are a lot of these primaries held. It started in Iowa, or usually they start in Iowa and Nevada. I think it was early January this year. And then the national conventions, finish up with Super Tuesday, where there are many primaries held in many states at the same time, and then these eventually lead to the national convention. So there's a Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, where usually held in either August or September, where the delegates come together and they nominate, or they select the person who will then run for president, or who will become the presidential candidate. So for example, in 2008, you had Clinton and Obama were the first, the top two. Obviously, Obama won that one, and with him, the vice presidential candidate was selected to be Biden as well. This year, Obama was the incumbent president, so incumbent means that he's already been president. He's the president. I don't know. I've usually found that incumbent presidents are selected again, just in whatever convention happens.
The odds are they will be elected unless they're Lyndon Johnson, in which case sometimes they are forced to resign.
Yep. The delegates, I found this interesting. I didn't know this about delegates as well. The pledged delegates are allocated among states, District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico, and there are two main criteria. One is that the proportion of votes each state gave the candidate in the last 3 presidential elections, and also the percentage of votes that each state has in the Electoral College. And then, this was a really interesting part for me, is that the delegate population that is sent to the convention, it must reflect the state's ethnic distribution, and also that at least 50% of the delegates must be women. That sounded, I don't know, I didn't expect to read about that. And then just as a last note, to be able to run for president, there are 3 requirements to be able to run for president of the U.S. One is that you have to be born in the U.S., so I cannot, which is a huge, huge disappointment. The other is that you have to have lived in the U.S. for 14 consecutive years, and the third one is that you have to be at least 35 years of age, so I still have some time. Maybe they'll change the law. Is it for me?
We don't know. It will work, maybe. Because the time passing, and then laws always is amending. Thanks, Yekta. Yekta give a informative speech about how the system is working in the U.S. elections, about especially maybe more interesting one is the Electoral College. I mean which is a little bit less known in Turkey, because we suppose that people are choosing directly to do president, but it's not as she pointed out clearly. Now the second speaker is the Behlül Özkan. Behlül, now he's a currently lecturer at the Marmara University Department of Political Science and International Relations, which is my ex-department that I was there for 8 years. Previously he joined into the department, he was working at the Hacettepe University and the Boğaziçi University, giving the lectures on the international relations and American policy. Now he is also giving the courses on American politics and American foreign policy at the Marmara University. And he also works at the Al Jazeera network. And now after he's completing his undergraduate studies at Boğaziçi University, he joined the Tufts University, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He finished his dissertation with the social construction of the Turkish Vatan, which is one of the most striking studies on the Turkish political geography, that it's newly published by the Yale University Press with the title From the Adobe of Islam to the Turkish Vatan, the making of the national homeland in Turkey. He published several articles on geopolitics, American foreign policy, energy issues, and his articles and reviews appeared in various academic journals, including Journal of Geopolitics. Now, today he will talk about the historical continuities in US presidential elections. Floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me for the panel. Today I'm going to talk about historical background of American politics because I believe in order to understand contemporary American elections, it is necessary to analyze at least the party structures from this historical background. If we look at the American elections and American political history, we can divide it into three different sections. The first section is dominated by Republican Party, and it is from 1870 till 1932. Basically, it was ended with the economic crisis of 1929, and in these 16 elections, 12 of them were won by Republican candidates, and this is called the long Gilded Age. Basically, this area was under the control of American society, economy, and politics, was under the control of industrial barons like Rockefeller, huge energy, oil and coal companies, steel companies, manufacturers, railroad companies, and these heavy industrial barons. They basically dominated with the Republican Party, the American elections and American politics. But this area ended with 1929 crisis, and in the New Deal area, started with Roosevelt, from 1932 till 1968. Out of 9 elections, in 7 of them, Democrat presidents won the elections. And only 2 of them, basically Eisenhower won 1952 and 1956 elections. And then we see the cultural backlash, the notorious 1960s in US elections, the civil rights movement, and I'm going to go into the details of that. And with the 1960s, we see again the domination of American politics by Republican presidential candidates from 1968 till 2008. Out of 10 elections, 7 of them were won by Republican candidates. And we can guess that in 2008 financial crisis, maybe we can say that America entered into a new period, but time will show us whether it is going to be a new era or just the continuation of the old. As I explained, from 1870 till 1932, we see a politics of plutocracy in the United States. What is plutocracy? It is basically high degree of economic inequality, but there is a low-level social mobility. Basically, economy and politics of United States was dominated by elite class, and they never allow the lower classes to move up to the high side of the pyramid. And but what is the reason for that? Because we have a huge middle class, and they cannot change the system until the economic collapse of 1929. The reason is obvious, because when we think about the last part of the 19th century, we see that American workers, the labor class, is very weak. It was not unionized. And there were lots of immigrants which were socially and economically very weak. And there were southern blacks who cannot participate in the elections and in politics. And therefore, we have the poorest class in the United States that cannot influence politics. That didn't have a say in elections. But with the 1929 economic crisis, almost everything changed in American politics, and with the election of the Roosevelt, a New Deal era started. And as we see in these 9 elections from 1932 till 1964. Only two of them, 1952 and 56 elections, were won by Eisenhower, the Republican. The rest is dominated by Republican candidates, Democratic candidates, sorry. And first of all, Roosevelt changed the policy of taxation in the United States. As we see in this chart, the red one is the taxation of the highest class, highest top income earners, and the blue one is the lowest income earners. And as we see, before the Roosevelt's rose to power, the top income tax rate was just 10%. And with Roosevelt, it increased to 30% and to 79%. And today it is again lowered by Republicans to 35%. Basically, when Roosevelt came to power, he realized that he has to tax the rich in order to make the conditions of the poor better. And therefore, interestingly, he was from a very wealthy family, and he's called as traitor to his class. And basically, Roosevelt increased the state's power in economy. Before Roosevelt, the only state institution in economy in the United States was post office. But with Roosevelt, huge roads, bridges, dams, schools, hospitals, airports, rural electrification, and housing incrementally changed the economic structure of the United States, and he increased the number of unionized workers from 10% to 30%, and unions raised the average of their members, but they also raised wages for similar workers. And as a result of New Deal, many Catholic Union members, Jewish intellectuals, and other non-WASP sections of the society participated in American politics. And American economy reached its peak in 1960s, and we see a cultural backlash in American politics. And although times were good, it was the good old days, culturally, there was a poll in 1966, for example, and people were asked, would you say things in this country are heading in the right or wrong direction? This is in 1966, and it was the peak of American power in economy and in politics, just before the oil shock. And only 26% of the Americans said the country is going in the right direction, and 71% of the Americans said we are going in the wrong direction. There was a dramatic material progress in the New Deal era, but the majority of Americans thought American society was collapsing because they think crime rate was increasing, cities were devastated by anti-Vietnam, anti-war riots. Young Americans were growing their hair, taking drugs, having sex before marriage, and there are civil rights movement, and many Americans think that American society is collapsing, and this is the Time magazine from 1966, and even Time magazine said in its headline, is God dead? I mean, this type of questions were asked in American society. And plus, the civil rights movement, and end of segregation. Because in the Second World War, blacks in the American army fought not only for America, but they also fought against racism in Nazi Germany. And they came back to the United States, and they saw segregation in their own country. And the civil rights movement peaked from 1950s, and Democrats during the Kennedy and Johnson era, they realized that Soviet Union became the champion of the idea of man created equal, and they said, look, we could not continue with this segregation. We should end this, and we should pass the civil rights movement. And to counterbalance Soviet Union, America needed to end segregation and discrimination of its minorities. And basically, Lyndon Johnson signed the end of the segregation civil rights bill, and he said, we lost to South for a generation. I mean, the South from the Civil War, from 1860s till 1960s voted continuously for Democrats, but with the Civil Rights Bill, the southern politics, the politics of southern states changed dramatically. They shifted from Democrats to Republicans, which transformed American politics significantly. And in 1960s, many Americans believed that the push for civil rights was destroying the American society. For example, Ronald Reagan, at that time, he was a governor of California. Later in 1980s, he became the president of the United States. He said that, and he was a Republican, he said, if an individual wants to discriminate against Negroes by not selling his house or not renting his apartment, he has the right to do so. Although the Republicans were against civil rights movement, they really received started to receive conservative votes in the United States. In 1960s, at the end of the 1960s, we see the rise of neocons and new right under the Republican Party. And in late 1960s, Republicans realized that exploiting this cultural backlash in the society and turmoil would serve their interests and would win votes. And they were right, because since 1968, they were dominant in the elections. And their aim was, the aim of the new right was a counter-revolution to repair the political and cultural damage done to American society in 1960s. And they had three objectives. First, they were opposed to left and communism. For example, they were pro-Vietnam War, because they said Vietnam is a new Munich for United States, and they were against appeasement towards communism. Second, they appreciated authority. 1960s, authority in American society is collapsing. Police, army, clergy, parents, all these centers of the autonomy were challenged and questioned by the young generation. Collapse of institutional legitimacy, and new right was against multiculturalism. They were against radical feminism, and they were against gay rights movement. Instead, they defended institutions like marriage, law and order, and religion. The third important point is they were pro-strong leadership. And Reagan was a turning point for them because they believe that it is the golden age. Reagan era is the golden age, 1980s, for neocons and new right. And they believe America has a mission for the world, and they believe that it has to defeat communism and fight against communism in everywhere. And new right believe that American values are, by definition, universal values. And they believe the United States has a unique role in the world to secure and advance freedom, namely democratic capitalism. And with the rise of Republican, with the start of Republican hegemony in American politics, especially since 1973, everyone below 90% of the wage distribution saw his income grow more slowly than average. That means only 10% of the society saw above average gains. And only the top percent of the society has done better since 1970s than they had done between 1945 and 73. Changes in institutions and changes in norms explain rising inequality in the United States. And I'm going to give you a striking example how the American economic structure changed when we compare General Motors in 1969 and Walmart in 2005. For example, a salary of the CEO of General Motors was $795,000, close to $800,000 in 1969. And at that time, average worker earned $9,000. And this is, in today's standards, in 2005 standards, $40,000 per year. But if you compare the salary of CEO of Walmart in 2005, it is $23 million. It's a huge increase. But if you look at the average worker, it is just $18,000. The crucial question is, since 1960s, Republicans has been waging a war against against the welfare state, against the interest of the middle and lower class Americans. But then why they have been able to win so many elections? This is the crucial question. The answer is the new right and neocons, they found ways to distract the public and get people to vote against their own interests. Furthermore, they exploited the racial division. For example, since minorities in the United States are highly overrepresented among the poorest Americans, any income redistribution will benefit particularly minorities. And Republicans used this tool, and the opponents of redistribution of income used race-based rhetoric to fight against left-wing policies. They used abortion and drugs and this type of social issues in order to distract the electors, citizens of the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Behlül. It is very interesting to hear that how the social gap is using to manipulate the electoral system or so on and so forth. The things that he mostly focusing on how the social movement and the economic disparities and the social gaps has an impact on the historical within the historical continuity of the presidential elections in the U.S. Now, the third speaker is Richard Perez. Richard is an American writer and author on Turkish and American political issues. He is living in Turkey currently, and he is staff writer for Turkish Review and frequent contributor to the Today's Zaman, Star newspaper, and the Agos. I mean, maybe the most important thing about him that he wrote a book about the Merve Kavakçı case, which is one of the just newly published, but which is somehow very influential today's Turkish debates about the comparative political Islam and the Islamism studies, and also to think about the Turkish political lives today. The title of the book is like "The Day Turkey Stood Still: Merve Kavakçı's Walk into the Turkish Parliament." And today he will speak about the candidates' policies on the economic and the social matters, that especially in historical perspective that Behlül, Özkan focused on. And floor is yours. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments. I really appreciated your comment about Republicans being able to have people vote against their own interest. I couldn't have said it better as a lifelong Democrat. I've always thought that was true. That's very interesting. Okay, we have an election coming up, and I'm the only one here who actually voted in this election, I guess.
I wanted to.
You wanted to, but you couldn't. And so I've been following it very closely. I watched both conventions, and for the last 9 months, I've been absorbed totally in the American election, so I think I know what the social and economic policies are. But the truth is that it's difficult to figure out what they are. When you look at these two candidates, you're involved in a very large campaign, and the goal of this campaign is obviously not to just talk about your policies. If that were the case, then campaigns would be very simple. That's not the goal. The goal is to win the election, and as was brought up, it's not even to win the total number of votes. It's the total number of electoral votes. So really what you have in the American election is 50 elections, 50 state elections, winner take all for electoral votes. And as you aptly brought out, the big focus is on a few key battleground states. So that certainly has an impact on what policies you talk about and which ones you forget about. This is a massive campaign. This is a $2 billion, in Turkish liras, that's 3.6 billion Turkish liras spent on this campaign. And it comes at you from many different directions. I get 10 to 15 emails every day because I've signed up for both websites, Romney for president and Obama for president. And constantly get emails from all kinds of people, sometimes famous actors and actresses, but I don't think they're really aiming at me individually. And Mitt Romney's constantly sending me emails. His wife is sending me emails. I don't know if he knows that or not. It's a massive campaign. There are PACs, and these are political action committees. Since I'm American, I brought one of these little things. Okay, there are PACs, and PACs, thanks to a Supreme Court decision, are not subject to control by anyone. So there's a rich group of industrialists in America called the Koch Brothers. No, it's not the same person as Koch University. It's a different Koch Brothers. But the Koch Brothers have contributed tens and tens of millions of dollars through political action committees to this campaign. And they have responsibility to no one, not even to the candidates. So they can come out with advertisements which are perhaps, as you say, yalancı, I think is the word in Turkish. They're misinformation and lies. And there are no restrictions whatsoever against them. And so these PAC advertisements really complicate the campaign. So again, this is a very big campaign, and it's not always easy to figure out what the actual policies are. A lot of the messaging is focused on individual states, individual people, whether they're older or young, by ethnic group, and what their interests are. And also, of course, there's a tremendous political context. These candidates will do whatever it takes to get enough electoral votes. Again, that's the goal. It's not to delineate their policies. And it's been found to be a very good tactic that instead of talking about your policies, it's better to attack the other opponent's policies. This negative campaigning is done more than positive campaigning. That's simply the reality of politics in America today. And the result is that a lot of the policies that come out are very vague, because specific policies are easy to criticize. So the goal is not to come up with a great policy, it's to come up with a policy that can't be criticized. And so you have a very nebulous, sort of vague promises that you make, but it's very difficult to criticize them. Now, as was brought out, there's a primary campaign season. This is very different than in Turkey, where you don't have primaries in Turkey. In Turkey, the party basically nominates a candidate, and a lot of times the head of the party nominates the candidate. It's not that way in the US. Anybody can run for a nomination of Republican or Democratic primaries, as long as you're registered to that party. And it can be done in a way that's very open, and you could be basically elected as a candidate when most of the Republicans, the mainline Republican Party, let's say, would not be interested in you. So this has become an issue for Romney, because Romney ran in these primaries against very conservative Republicans, and he tried to conservatize them. And he moved very, very far to the right, because this was the core Republican constituency, which, as you brought up, the neocons still seem to be around, and Republicans, the active ones, are very conservative. Then the general election comes, and the Republican candidates try to move to the center, and they try to forget what they said during the primaries. This is the biggest problem that Romney has in this election. For example, during the primaries, all the Republican candidates were talking about how they were against Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is an organization that supports women with prenatal care and exams, and also, to some degree, abortions. So all the Republicans said, we will defund and we will not support Planned Parenthood. But if you go to Romney's website today, Mitt Romney for president, you won't find anything about Planned Parenthood on his and he doesn't mention it ever in any speeches anywhere, because he's trying to move to the center. He's trying to forget those policies. He wants to get elected, and he can't just get elected by Republicans. The same is true with birth control. Now, there are some very conservative policies that Republicans support. One is the Blunt Amendment, which lets companies decide whether or not women should have coverage for birth control based on the employer's moral views. Well, Romney supported the Blunt Amendment, which it was really aimed at supporting the Catholic Church, which did not support birth control. It's 2012. Birth control is all of a sudden an issue? I mean, this is very surprising. But during the debates, when Romney debated Obama, he basically said, well, I support women's access to birth control. Yolanja, I think isn't that the phrase? Okay. I mean, this is a blatant lie, but I'm a Democrat, so I'm not objective about it. Okay. But these became big issues. Now, again, during the primaries, he said that he favors tax cuts for everybody. He's been recorded saying that, including the top 1% of earners in the country. And these are millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires. Okay? During the first debate with Barack Obama, he said, no, I don't support tax cuts for everybody across the board. I don't support them for the top 1%. So what does Romney actually believe, and what are his policies? Well, it depends on who he's talking to. Okay? So this is, again, this consistency is a big issue. But the biggest problem Romney has in the election is that he was secretly recorded during a fundraiser at someone's house in my home state of Florida, saying that, 47% of the American population is not going to vote for me anyway, because they're just victims. They just depend on the government, and they want to get entitlements. He was recorded by someone on their iPhone who held on to it for 4 months and then revealed it during the election. So this makes Romney look like a real elitist. I couldn't say that word. But doesn't make him look bad. But of course, during the general election, again, he moves to the center and says he supports 100%. Now, you would think that this would be not a close election, but it's extremely close. Okay? Here's an ad on the part of the Democrats. And I'm showing this to you just to show you what kinds of things go on in this election. Romney had a program, a tax plan, and I think this is from RomneyTaxPlan.com, which the Republicans somehow did not buy up this URL, and the Democrats bought it, and they did an ad, quote unquote, for Romney. And it says, for a detailed explanation of how the Romney-Ryan tax plan is able to cut taxes by $5 trillion without exploding the deficit or requiring tax hikes on the middle class, simply click on the button below. But when you go to this website and you try to click on Get the Details, then Get the Details shoots up to the corner of your screen. And then you go up there, you try to click on it, and it goes down, and it keeps moving it around, and you can't click on it. So these are the kinds of simplification strategies that are done by the candidates who attack each other's program if they're too nebulous and too vague. Okay? And again, I'm showing this to you just to get a feel for the fact that people do not know about detailed policies. They listen to the very simple ones. During the last debate, Barack Obama, in a line that he, of course, memorized, said, Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s. It's got a real, sounds very good. It's very simple. And this was during the foreign policy debate. So Obama, forget about foreign policy. He used this to attack Romney. And then he said what the Democrats have been saying for the last year, which is that Romney advocates the same trickle-down economic policies that got us in trouble in the first place. I've heard Raul Emanuel say this 1,000 times, the campaign manager for Obama. Well, the way that the Romney campaign deals with this is, instead of talking about trickle-down economics, they say that Obama supports trickle-down government, whatever that is, okay? And that's, I suppose, entitlements. So this is the kind of mass simplification for mass consumption that the candidates do. And again, it obfuscates, it's a very fancy word, but it clouds what the real meanings of this campaign are. So let's look at them, finally. Get Richard Paris's view of what the real views are, okay? Let's talk about Willard Mitt Romney. That's his first name, in case anybody didn't know, okay? He's a religious person. He's a Mormon. He said that he was severely conservative during the primary campaign. In 1969, I have to say I'm a pretty old person. I was around. I was a college student. I was demonstrating against the Vietnam War. I had long hair. I have no hair now, but that was a different age, okay? What was Mitt Romney doing in 1969? He was a missionary. He was in France trying to convert French people to Mormonism. This guy was not in the mainstream, okay, of students in the 60s, okay? I was there, I can tell you that. Romney is worth $250 million. Now, he filed his tax return. In Turkey, you're really lucky. You don't have to file taxes. I think this is amazing. I might become a Turkish citizen because that is wonderful. But in America, you have to file these tax returns. Mitt Romney's tax return last year was over 850 pages long. Just think about that, 850 pages. And he made hundreds of copies when he revealed his taxes. Now, I know why he doesn't want to reveal his taxes for the last 10 years. He couldn't afford to get it copied. You know, it's just too much money. This is someone who has most of his money in the Cayman Islands and offshore banks to avoid paying taxes. The tax rate he pays is lower than the tax rate I pay, and I don't make a lot of money. He paid 13% in taxes last year. 13% on an income of about $20 million. So, gives you a feel for who Mitt Romney is. He went to Harvard Business and Law School. He was a governor of Massachusetts, which was a Democratic state, but he was a Republican. He lost the primaries in 2008 to John McCain, and he's basically been running for president for the last 6 years. So he finally won the primaries in 2012, and he did it by responding to the Tea Party, this very conservative group, and the conservative wing of the Republican Party, okay? But during the first debate, he became a moderate. So this is the kind of thing that happens during the election. So what are his social policies? Very much anti-abortion, which is not something that's supported by a majority of women. Of course, does not support gay marriage, is hostile to entitlements, money's going to poor people. He had that 47% comment, which at first he said, well, his wording was wrong. And then he said it was a mistake. He favored the Blunt Amendment, which is the one dealing with employers allowed to control what coverage women have. He's against stem cell research. He is anti-teachers' unions, okay? And he's anti-unions, even though there are laws in the US that protect unions' right to organize. He's very critical of what's known as Obamacare, but he supported the same sort of program in Massachusetts. He supports strict enforcement of immigration laws, and he very much likes conservative justices. All the ones I dislike, those are the ones he likes, like Clarence Thomas, for example. Okay? So this is standard sort of conservative stuff. But again, if you go to his website, you won't find any of this on the website. He just leaves out social policies from the website because he knows he can't win on those. he has a 10% gap with women. And if he loses this election, and he might win it, okay, but if he loses it, it'll be because of the women's vote. Okay. His economic policies, this has again been subject to all kinds of given arguments between the two parties. He wants to reduce government regulations. There's an 80-page report on his website on what he's going to do when he's president, and I had to read it in order to do this presentation effectively, and I loved it. Actually, it made a lot of sense. I started to say, maybe this guy's okay. Maybe I should vote for him. Okay, I mean, it's very well written, and he talks about reducing regulations, making it easier for people to do business. But when you look at it a little further, you find out that it's reducing regulations regarding the minimum wage and Environmental Protection Act and all kinds of other things, because we live in a very complex world. But this is something that Republican business people like. He wants across-the-board tax cuts from 35% to 25%. I mean, this is a big win for a lot of people in America who have a lot of money. And he wants a zero rate of taxes on interest and dividends. Well, last year, he made $20 million on interest and dividends. So I think it would help him quite a lot. I'd like to have 0% also, but I didn't really get close to $20 million. He criticizes Obama for the stimulus program and not focusing on that and focusing instead on Obamacare, which he says messed up the economy. And he has a 5-point program which you can read about on his site for coming up with 12 million more jobs. Okay. Now, there have been some reports that say that regardless of who's president, there probably will be 12 million more jobs over the next 4 years anyway. So that has a question about who controls the economy. But these are basically his economic policies. And for rich people, certainly, or well-off people, they're very supportive. For conservative people, for Tea Party people, they get a lot of support. And that's why this is a close election. Now, Obama has a different program. And this looks like I'm biased, putting this up here. And it's probably true. But Obama has to defend his last 4 years in office. I mean, he can't come up with policies. It won't matter. He's basically running on his record. And, the last 4 years, are they going to be like the next 4 years? That always becomes the mantra when you run against an incumbent. Okay? And Obama is a liberal Democrat. He's just the opposite of Romney. He's he supports gay marriage, he supports liberal justices, Equal Pay Act, he supports citizens, a path to citizenship on the part of illegal aliens, he supports stem cell research, Equal Pay Act, I think I brought that up. He wants to tax the rich, very much like Franklin D. Roosevelt, which you brought up. And he supports a role of government, an expanded role of government, not a limited role of government. And on economic policies, if he loses this election, it will be because the value of people's income and their houses have gone down dramatically. There is still a very high unemployment rate in the U.S. There's a real rate that is probably about 12%, even though the official rate is 7.8%. He comes up with some economic policies that are very liberal-minded, that probably will help the economy, but whether or not he gets a chance to do that is really problematical, because people vote for many, many different reasons, and his economic policies really may not matter at all to anybody. It's basically, are you positive or negative about the future, economic future in America? Because there has been quite a lot of pain in the last 4 or 5 years, regardless of whose fault it is. And finally, just to show you those electoral, the blue states, and as you brought up, the blue states are Democratic, the red states are Republican, and the ones that aren't completely red or blue are the states and battleground states, and that's where the election is going to be won or lost. We know, like you said, that California is going to vote for Obama. The probability is 100%. Okay, and we know that Texas is not going to vote for Obama, is going to vote for Romney. The country's pretty split. I think there only are 150 independent voters in the entire United States of America. I've never met one, so I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But these states, Florida, Ohio, I mean, those are the big states. Right now, Obama has an edge, but anything can happen in this election. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insider knowledge, providing the insider look to understand the candidates' policies and then how it will be effective on the American life. Then the fourth speaker is that Hasan Kösebalaban from Şehir University, from our Department of Political Science and International Relations. Before joining the Şehir, he was a professor at different universities: University of Utah, Mississippi State University, Michigan State University, Lake Forest College. Then he joined the Şehir in 2010. Then he completed his BA degree in Malaysia, International Islamic University with a political science. Then continued the MA in Tokyo, International University of Japan, and PhD in political science at University of Utah. I was supposing that it will be also International University of Utah, because all of them with the international. I mean, he published 2 books. One is about the Güneydoğu Asya'da İslam ve Siyaset. It was published in 1997. Then the second one is about the Turkish foreign policy. I think his PhD thesis, that it's about the Turkish foreign policy, Islam, nationalism, and globalization. In addition to these writings, his articles are published in the many academic journals, including the Inside Turkey, World Affairs, Middle East Politics. And some also contribute to the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Islamic World. Today, he will talk about the US foreign policy after the elections, what it will be.
Thank you very much. Is it too strong? I mean, because this doesn't work here, so I have to use, is it okay? First of all, I would like to, I think there's a little bit echo. Maybe this is better? This is better, yeah. I think so, yeah. The foreign policy perspectives of the candidates in this election. First of all, I think it's important to mention that the United States is a country with strong political traditions, and its foreign policy is also strongly established. So I don't think, in my own opinion, that individual characteristic of a president matters that much. However, there are some accidental events, such as the invasion of Iraq, which wouldn't be possible perhaps under Obama, was made possible under Bush. So in that sense, an individual personality of a president or a prime minister in another country may be important. United States is a country with strong political traditions, I said, and one indication of this, perhaps other speakers also mentioned, I omitted this, is the fact that its elections, presidential elections, are conducted on Tuesday, the first Tuesday of November. Actually, it's not the first Tuesday of November, the Tuesday that follows the first Monday of November since 1845. So this they made in November because it was after the harvest, for the farmers it would be easier to also for campaigning, and also before the rough winter in the Midwest and other territories. So, but they kept this. So in other countries we have this term, a government collapses, such as in Britain or in Turkey. Early elections are called. But in the United States, never ever an early election is called. So elections are always conducted every 4 years on a set day, election day. And there are other things that I was also amazed to, you know, when I was making my own observations about the United States political culture. Traditions are very strong, even though the United States is a young nation by European standards, but its traditions are well established. In foreign policy, traditions are also well established for the United States. For example, the United States is a trading nation. That fact was, you know, will not change. It is, of course, very much, I mean, United States foreign policy is very much influenced by its geography. These may be changing, but, you know, geography doesn't change. There are still 2 oceans, you know, over there. What I mean by changing, maybe, you know, September 11 reminded the fact that, you know, now it's much easier for other people, non-Americans, you know, to cause trouble, you know, in the United States. So the perception of security for Americans was shattered by the event, first by Pearl Harbor, but more so than by 9/11, by September 11. So security became a primary issue for American households. Still, though, foreign policy is very much far in the agenda of American voters. They don't vote on foreign policy. They did not vote for the Democratic Party in the last election because of foreign policy, blunders of Bush. They voted against the Republican Party because of the economic troubles. So economic trouble is economic conditions of the country, economic performance of the administration is number 1 in the mindset of US voters. That may be the same in Turkey. The second to that is social issues, people's identity. As Richard was talking about, the abortion issue and family issues and other issues, health insurance issue, and other issues that are important for social welfare of the people, or their moral standards of the people, conservative versus liberal. Only the third in the agenda is the foreign policy. But of course, this may change according to individual American. For example, if you are an Arab American, you may be more interested in foreign policy. Or if you are a Jewish American, you may be more interested in foreign policy. But most Americans are not interested in foreign policy per se. So traditionally, when the presidential candidates had their 3 series of television debates, the first was on economic policies, and the second was on social. I think it was more on everything. It was a town hall style, so they were just standing and then confronting each other. And then the last one was on foreign policy. If you closely watch the polls, the foreign policy poll did not change the poll results that much because people don't pay much attention. And even in that debate, candidates were very careful to turn the attention to economy, especially the opposition, Romney in this case, was looking for every opportunity to turn the attention to economic issues. So given that, I would still would like to summarize the major perspectives of the candidates, where they stand. First of all, on international diplomacy, particularly the United Nations. Obama is a multilateralist. He advocates multilateral engagements in foreign policy, whereas and sees the United Nations as an important tool of American foreign policy, whereas Romney does not believe in the United Nations diplomacy. He considers the United Nations as a failure. I think in that regard, Romney may agree more with Tayyip Erdogan than Obama, because he also more recently considered and criticized the United Nations as a failure, particularly in the case of Syria. China is number 1 agenda in US foreign policy. It is the most important bilateral relationship in world politics today, US-Chinese relations. And China, different from all other foreign policy issues, is also an economic issue for the United States, because candidates' positions on China is a matter of local and domestic economy. Obama wants to continue the Bush periods or even the earlier periods engagement policy with China. United States foreign policy towards China is multifaceted. That means it has many dimensions. On the economic dimension, they are very close to each other. There are many companies moving to China, investing and producing there and bringing these products back to the United States market. If you shop in the United States, you would notice that 98 maybe % of everything is made in China. So this relationship continues to the detriment of the middle class in the United States. Because if you, you might hear this term that United States economy is in trouble. It is not necessarily true for the companies. Apple is doing very well. Microsoft is doing very well. Maybe auto companies are not doing well, but all other sectors are doing very well. But they are employing Chinese workers. They are not employing American workers. So they are employing Chinese workers, producing in China, bringing those products back to the United States and selling to US companies. And with Walmart's slogan that, low prices every day or something, but low prices cost also, low prices that also come at an expense, which is the middle class income levels. Romney made 17 or you said 20, I read $17 million last year, in a year, so $17 million. If 17 is true, it doesn't matter much. For me, the difference is huge, but for him, it might be small. So, but everyday American is not making that much money. The income differences is increasing, and American voters see China as their target country. And Romney capitalizes on this, pointing out at China that the first day in office, he will re-evaluate the trade relationship with China. I don't think that's possible because the campaign contributions to the Republican Party come from large companies, and number one is Walmart. So Mr. Watson and his what's the name? Walmart company in any case, because if you look at the income level, Walmart family does not look very big there, but they are divided into many brothers and sisters. So all together, they are a giant company based in Arkansas, and it makes huge campaign contributions to the Republican Party, but nevertheless also has very good relations with their Democrats through Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton's husband used to be a governor of Arkansas, and at that time, Hillary Clinton sit in the executive board of Walmart. So Walmart is a smart company. It doesn't put all of its eggs in one basket. It invests in both parties. And there are many companies like that. So companies rule the United States trade policy, and in that sense, I don't think Romney can detach from that, dependency on companies. So the dependency on China will increase. And I will tell one thing. For example, sports shoe maker New Balance sometimes sells shoes made in the United States, and they have big stickers, proudly made in the United States. I took one of them. It was $80 compared to the New Balance shoe, which is made in China, only $25. But then it says in small print that made in the United States with imported material. Okay. So in this global economy, you cannot really afford inviting or calling back your companies to the United States at these prices, and then expect them to stay competitive, in the international business. Other than that, Russia is an important talk point in this election campaign, especially because of Romney's assault on Russia as a foe. Russia is our geopolitical foe, he said. We have to, first of all, Obama made this reset policy with Russia and signed a treaty to reduce the number of nuclear weapons with Russia, the New START treaty. And Romney criticizes that Obama's policy was called reset. Now Romney says we have to reset the failed reset policy. And Obama accuses Romney back as having a Cold War mentality, which might be very well true, I think. Romney as you said, was spending his time on a religiously holy mission, while American youth was protesting against the Vietnam War, in the 1960s environment, and he was away from this. So he is a right-winger, and he might be having this, strong Cold War mentality templates still operating in his mind. Well, the third, I think, the agenda is the Middle East, and that's that we are interested in this part of U.S. foreign policy more than others. For Obama, Middle East can be divided into several, segments. Iran is an important country for the United States because of the security of Israel. Obama and Romney said many things about, they have said many things about Iran, but I did not really notice much difference, except in discourse, because Romney also did not come out with a promise of a war against Iran the first day he comes to office or something. So he said he would not leave the military option off the table, and Obama said the same thing. Romney said strong sanctions. Obama is doing that, strong sanctions on Iran. And Romney said he will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon capability, and Romney said the same thing. So in that sense, there's not much difference, and I think it's an interesting thing that Romney was being careful about Iran too, in terms of promising a military attack which would appease the Jewish voters, but he did not. Israel, as you know, Obama is not the first, but one of the U.S. presidents who have not visited Israel, in his first term in office. There are many U.S. presidents like that before, but this point was criticized by Romney, pointing out that, you did not visit Israel, you have not visited Israel, and while he as a candidate visited Israel and made some promises, Romney criticizes Obama of showing a weak leadership in terms of negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, whereas I don't know if he will be different, in that regard. One of the points that I have, a matter of disappointment with Obama is his low engagement in terms of Israeli-Palestinian issue, but I don't think, again, that U.S. foreign policy in that sense can be changed by Democrats or the Republicans. Syria, and again, a similarity. Romney is much more assertive in terms of supporting the opposition in Syria, saying that Obama should have done more in terms of supporting the opposition. Obama has called Assad to step out, but did not really do much in that sense, and especially showed hesitancy in giving strategic weapons, strategically important weapons to the opposition, especially Stinger missiles. United States opposed giving Stinger missiles to the opposition, and without Stinger missiles, it's not possible for opposition to make any gains. They can hold territory, but not hold this for long because of the heavy and indiscriminate and quite cruel attacks by the Assad regime on civilian populated areas in Damascus and Aleppo. Without this, but it might change after elections, I don't know, but on this point they are quite similar. On Egypt, you can see much more difference in terms of discourse. Romney criticized Obama of allowing a Muslim Brotherhood candidate to win the presidency, whereas he is actually supporting or in favor of supporting the opposition in Syria, which might bring us to the same result. A Muslim Brotherhood candidate winning presidency later on in Syria, and he is now opposing this in case of Egypt. He is calling Arab Spring as an Arab winter. In that group of people who calls Arab Spring Arab winter. But at the same time, very much in favor of supporting the opposition in Syria. I think there's a contradiction for Romney. In terms of Afghanistan, Romney is in favor of evaluating the conditions on the ground and then making decisions based on the advice of the commanders, and Obama is doing that already. So Romney is also in favor of withdrawing from Afghanistan by 2014, and Obama does not set a date, as far as I know, on that. Latin America is an important part of U.S. foreign policy, but interestingly, the candidates were quite silent on Latin America. They did not say much, especially Obama did not say much about Latin America, whereas Romney uttered several words, such as opportunities for us in Latin America are too great to ignore. The Latin American economy is as great as Chinese economy or something like that. I would remind you that this might also be related to Romney's religious background, because I'm quite familiar with Mormons, and Mormons are religiously interested in Latin America, much more so than the Middle East, actually, because of their peculiar religious interpretations. And they don't have much more memory or vision about the Middle East, because for them, for example, the return of Jesus Christ is already done. He has come already. So it's a history. Because for other Christians, for mainstream Christians, he would still resurrect. And many Christians attach this, especially evangelical Christians, attach this to the return of the Jews back to Israel as an indication or as a process which would make it faster, make return of Jesus Christ faster. So therefore, Israel is an important part of U.S. foreign policy debate, not only for the Jewish American voters, but also evangelical voting base, as the great book by Walt and Mearsheimer also include. It is not the Jewish lobby, but it is the Israeli lobby, which includes a significant portion of Christian voters. And Romney is not one of them, because he's Mormon. He does not believe in any of these things, because for him, there is already a living prophet. When there is a living prophet, you don't need Jesus Christ, to return back. So, it will also complicate the matters, because when you have a living prophet, I don't know what kind of foreign policy you can make without, consulting him, because you have to consult him every time. You cannot make a policy without consulting. If I have a living prophet, I would always consult him. That's the same thing. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is very interesting to speak about the living prophet and then its implications on the foreign policy. But the Utah, the Salt Lake City, is the capital of the Mormons, if I am not wrong.
That's the Zion.
Yeah. I mean, now time for the Q&A session, and then I'm opening the floor to you. Please, questions, comments, and let's start with Professor Duran.
I want to ask a question to Hasan Kösebalaban. You have made a comparison between Obama's and Romney's foreign policy perspectives, but do you expect any change in Obama's foreign policy if he wins the election? There is a political assumption that there can be change in the second terms of presidents.
In terms of what?
Second term.
But towards
in
what
terms of,
case?
In terms of Middle East.
Middle East. Yeah, there are I think two cases which you can expect some changes, or you may be thinking about some changes. One is Israeli-Palestinian conflict, another is Syria. And personally, I don't expect any change in the Israel-Palestinian conflict case. It is deeply rooted in terms of U.S. foreign policy. And it's not one president can decide in many things, because there's still a Congress, and Congress is very decisive in terms of making foreign policy decisions, particularly budgetary issues. This one thing I expect immediate change is about Syria after the elections. The nature of that change, I don't know. I mean, I don't think the United States will intervene militarily into Syria, but we'll have to do something about Syria. And Obama knows that, and U.S. foreign policy establishment knows that. This is not because of humanitarian considerations, that there are, too many people are dying or something like that, but geostrategic and geopolitical considerations. Number one issue here is the growth of Iran's power. United States has the same security interpretation as Turkey in this sense, that the Iran's security and Iran's power has grown unnaturally. I mean, maybe Iraq was natural, but Syria is unnatural in terms of the population support to Iran. So it has to be curtailed. Iran's power in the region has to be curtailed, because they also know that they cannot do much about the nuclear stuff. They have to do geostrategic and geopolitical movements to curtail Iran's power. And I expect change in that sense.
Yeah. Verebilir misiniz? Just a minute, please.
So sorry. Which steps they're gonna take, you think? I mean, what can Obama do from this point of?
You mean Syria?
Yeah. Just regarding Syria. I mean, what is left now for them? If you just mentioned that he's not gonna intervene militarily, so what can he do?
Yeah, I think you can still change the fate of the civil war if it is civil war. And personally, I don't accept that description. By allowing the flow of strategically important weapons to the opposition. And in this sense, the Stinger missiles I think is number one. The anti-aircraft missiles. Not to allow Assad to fly his helicopters and airplanes freely over the skies of
You're
Syria.
mentioning a no-fly zone?
No, without even a no-fly zone, you know, there are ways to impose this. But of course, the United States wants to be in control of the Stingers. They don't want these Stingers to be at loose. So therefore, you might have more American, presence, military presence, but at the top level, not at the, troops level. That's my guess. I think you can also contribute to this if you have ideas. But through this, I think you can still influence. Yeah.
Taking away your microphone's not
Sure.
fair.
There's your microphone.
That works well, though. The only issue I would bring up is the presence of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And the U.S., I think, just doesn't want those
I was going
missiles
to add
to
that.
be in their hands. And I think this is a very dangerous situation for the U.S. And that's why I think they're just providing small weapons right now through Turkey, actually,
Yes,
and
so-
the CIA. But those Stinger missiles, obviously, would do a lot. But the Al-Qaeda component, I think, scares away America.
So it is still a risk, you mean?
Absolutely. And
So
Obama was very
How
much...
they gonna decide to put the stringers or not?
Well, Obama is the wrong person to get involved militarily in Syria. I mean, he was very much against the Iraq war. Syria is not a threat to the U.S., and even Turkey's not involved. And they're on Turkey's border. So, it was ludicrous, in my opinion, for the U.S. to be involved in Iraq 8,000 miles away was not a threat to the United States. Weapons or no weapons of mass destruction. So he campaigned on that in 2008. So it's just, for me, it's unlikely that Obama would get involved in Syria without a real coalition, meaning, Turkey, NATO, Egypt. But, right now, I mean, the Arab League is sitting back and doing nothing. And they've got the capacity to be involved. So I think the U.S. has learned its lesson, and no one in the U.S. wants to get... The U.S. has been at war for 10 years with two countries on the other side of the world. I just don't see... America really goes from being isolationist to, and then getting involved in things like Vietnam. Right now, it's in a very isolationist mood, does not want to get involved. And it's also cost $60 billion a month to be involved in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Another thing, even though we expect, some changes, one reason not to expect too much changes, because election thing in the United States is not every 4 years, it's every 2 years. Because there's a midterm elections, and it changed the characteristic of the Congress from one party to the other party. Therefore, politicians are always in mood of thinking about elections, particularly or congressmen, not small politicians, but two federal elected politicians are present and the vice president, but other than that, they are all local elected politicians. And for them, you know, for individual congressmen, it's still every 4 years, but the half of the Congress changes every 2 years. So therefore, even a president does not want his political party to lose the Congress. And they are quite sensitive about many of these issues. Syria, humanitarian characteristic of this war does not affect much American public opinion, but if an Islamically oriented leader comes to power in Syria and this comes at the expense of US troops, I think a political leader has to pay for it, you know, in the United States election, in the eyes of the public opinion, you know, I mean, after Iraq particularly.
Another questions or comment? May I abuse the being a chair? Okay. Actually, my question is relating to the NATO because you didn't, Professor Kösebalaban, you didn't mention nothing about the NATO. How they perceive the NATO, and then now there is a very hot debate which is going on about the responsible to protect that there will be Article 5 will be implemented or not in the Middle East, especially relating to the Syria.
I think on NATO they both agree, but on the issue of multilateralism, you know, there is a difference between Obama and Romney, but NATO is, you know, does not have much substance without the United States. You know, both knows about this, and it is an organization led by the United States, whereas the United Nations is different. I mean, United Nations is not at the control of the United States. You know, for example, veto of Russia and China are enough. Even one of them will be enough to stop a major decision from being taken. But NATO is different. So there is a clear leadership of the United States, but both wants to use this organization. And is also NATO is a tool for the United States to stay in European theater. Without NATO, it will be the European Union, Germany and France will take the leadership. So United States does not want European Union or Europe to be led by European Union on security matters. So, and NATO is important in that regard. But when it comes to real war engagements, I don't think United States will accept any kind of commitments, except when it comes to its own security. You know, if the United States itself is attacked, NATO will be. I mean, this is not new for Turks. You know, for Turkey has experienced this in the case of Cyprus. We also have experienced this in the case of other problems. Now we experience this in the case of Syria. There is a clear attack on Turkish soil, and Turkey has to respond unilaterally to these attacks without invoking, you know, any principle of NATO. So it is, unfortunately, it's useless for Turkey. But it's useful for the United States because the United States uses this NATO card to stay politically active in the European theater or game, political game.
Question for Behlül Bey, who read the American political past or political history as a battle between the civil rights movement, let's say a reformist movement, and some backlashes against it, pull and push between the civil rights and the reactionary right. And you use the term cultural backlash to express the, you know, importance of this reaction against the civil rights reforms made in the 60s, which seemed to, in your account, to come back in the 70s, come back in the 80s in the form of neoconservatism. Now that we are, you know, on the edge of, on the verge, rather, of a new election, whereas Richard said the results or the gap seems to be very close between the two presidents, which is amazing to me, but may not be amazing to you. How do you assess the role or the impact of the, I won't use the word civil rights, but the race factor in American politics in the year 2012? Has it ceased to have any effect or importance, or does it still carry some weight?
I believe it still plays an important role. I forgot to show you the election maps of the United States. If you look at the election maps since 1960s, for example, southern states, and when I say southern states from Texas to Florida, they continuously vote for Republicans. And this is because Democrats passed the Bill of Civil Rights. They never change. I mean, it's amazing to see how Southern people are obsessed with civil rights and segregation. And another important striking movie for me was, it was a documentary, and I really recommend you to, all of you to watch this documentary. It's called What's the Matter with Kansas? Kansas is a state in the middle of United States, and the author wrote this book, and then they made a documentary about it, and you can watch the trailer. I forgot to show you at least the trailer of this documentary. Kansas was a socialist state, almost very left-wing, very socialist. And this author, I forgot the name, he looked at the history of the state and realized that left-wing, very socialist state moved in 50 years towards new right, very conservative right. And he realized that the class conflict has not changed in that state. Still it's very poor compared to rest of the United States, and he was really curious about the reason, and then he realized that issues such as abortion, such as religion, this type of race issues, minorities, gay marriage, still plays a very important role, and Republicans hijacked the economic issues, and people started to vote since 1960s about these constructed problems. And I still remember the beginning of the movie. The camera goes to a village in the middle of nowhere, and there's a house, very run down, knocks the door, and the guy opens the door. Very old guy, very poor. You can tell the dressing, the clothes are very run down, and ask about are you conservative or pro-democrat? He says, I mean, you can easily tell from his face, he's a very pure, from a very pure background, very poor middle class, and he says, no, I don't vote Democrat. They are pro-abortion, they are pro-gay marriage. I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, he says. I mean, it's really curious, how can he be a conservative? I mean, he should change the word because he's in a very poor condition. But I mean, it is very interesting to watch this movie and see these people, the people from deep America, I should call. I mean, the southern states and the middle of the United States, which continues to vote for for Republicans. And to answer your question, I still believe that at least in the southern states and in the middle of the deep America, the corn and corn belt, or they call it, I believe, race and these social issues play a huge role in politics.
I just wanted to agree with you on that. I mean, and I'm really glad you brought that up because America is a very conservative country. You know, I don't know if it's because it's isolated from the rest of the world or what. I mean, I grew up in like New York City, and I'm a left-wing, radical leftist. Okay, but I'm not typical, and it is true. There's a very strong center in U.S. politics, and if you don't get that center, you won't get elected. But it's interesting that that Romney made this crazy statement about half the country feel they're a bunch of victims, and he is still very much in this race, you know. You know, there's that other half of the country that says, yeah, those people, they think they're victims, and you're right about that. There's a lot of intangibles. It's not just pure economics, and you're right, completely. It's a very, very conservative. Race does play a part. It's true. It's these intangibles don't make economic sense because Mitt Romney, you know, he doesn't really care all that much about people who make $12,000 a year. But the Karl Rove for the Republicans was very good at making these issues the drivers that got Bush elected in 2000.
I mean,
So, you're right.
you mentioned you are from New York. I lived 7 years in Massachusetts, and when we talk about these different states, there's a huge difference between them, economically, socially, culturally. I traveled the southern states when I was in the United States, and I realized that it's like another country. I mean, the music, the food, the culture, the politics.
Texans think they are in another country. You know, if you talk to a Texan, yeah, I mean, I'm from New Jersey originally. I don't say, hey, I'm a New Jerseyan. Nobody does that, right? Nobody does that. But Texans talk about being, well, I'm Texan. You know, and they fly the Texas flag on front of their house. So you're right about that. And this is 50 state elections, you know. And Texas is off the table. I mean, they're going to vote for Romney no matter what he says.
I'm a teacher. My voice is easily heard everywhere. What about Obama's election itself? I mean, because I brought up this issue of race to you, and you said it's still important. So I think says still important. But the fact that Obama was elected,
But
you know,
he did it by getting 90% of the black vote, 90% of the Hispanic vote, 40% of the white male vote. I mean, and getting enough electoral votes. So I think if you look at it, that I mean, there's a lot of complex factors involved.
I mean, number of non-white voters are increasing in the United States. This last year was the first year in which the number of newborn babies who are white and number of newborn babies who are not white was equal. So the same number of whites and non-whites were born last year. So this year it will increase in favor of non-whites. So it's possible, as Obama showed, to win an election in the United States. You know, he showed in the last election without the majority of the whites. He did not win the majority white vote. So it is an extremely diverse country. So in Turkey, I don't know if you, want to reflect on Turkish politics. Would it be possible to win an election without the majority of ethnic Turks? So in that sense, without the majority of the whites, it is possible to win an election. So in future, we might have a Latino, president. So in that case. No, it will not end. And I think that's even though economy is number one on the agenda of U.S. voters, I cannot imagine a black American whose economic conditions are not very good, and still voting for Romney with the hope that he would be better. There's not such a likelihood. So he would still vote for Obama because Obama is black. And so race issue is important for both sides of the camp, not only for them, not only for whites versus blacks, but also among the whites, Jewish Americans, Arab Americans, or Muslim Americans in general. There are 7 million of them, and in important states they matter. Even though, for example, Obama is in favor of same-sex marriage, and for conservative Muslims it doesn't mean much, anything, or they are against it. But they will still vote for Obama because of still, I think the race in a large sense, is an ethnic sense.
I would like to show you this map. This is the first election after the civil rights movement, and basically this map has not changed dramatically since 1968. The only change is California, and California shifted from Republican to Democrats, not because the WASP tended to vote or change their political position, but lots of immigrants came to California, and that changed the democratic balance. And after 40 years, when we look at the Obama election, the Mid and the South stayed for Republicans. And I personally believe that no matter what Republicans do, or no matter what the candidate they choose, the South and the middle of the country will vote for Republicans. And it won't change in the near future.
Yeah, even Texas is in danger of being lost for the Republicans now, and will be in future. Yeah, definitely.
Well, there are changes that happen, but they do take a long time. They do take a while.
Please. Can you change it?
It's North Carolina.
North Carolina.
O Electoral College'da bir değişiklik var değil mi? Öyle bir şey de biliyorum.
Well, I mean, I don't know the entire details, but for North Carolina, for example, I feel like honestly it changes according to how many people come out to vote. So, I mean, you see North Carolina turn blue in 2008. It's going back to Republican.
Yeah, there was a good voter recruitment.
Yeah, like college students were hugely mobilized because of Obama. Like he's young, he's exciting, he has this "yes we can." It's like college students were like, "Oh hey, look, it's the American dream coming back." Sort of. That was my.
But don't get misled by the big red area.
Yeah.
Okay, because it doesn't exist according to New Yorkers. There is no Midwest.
Exactly.
So if you look at North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, I mean, who cares? It totals like 12 electoral votes.
Well, who cares his number? I mean, first, they also have 2 senators. And one, I mean, Senate is extremely important in foreign policy, decisions. And each of these states, no matter how small it is, and small states tend to be very white dominated, they also have 2 members in Senate. As opposed to California, Texas, Illinois, each of them also have 2. So in a way, the US election system, especially the congressional election system, maintains the white dominance in politics. So this is much debated, and when I had the opportunity to ask this question, I asked this to conservative Americans. They say this representation of land. I said representation of land is not important. Representation of people are important, and you cannot give Illinois or New York or California 2 senators as opposed to Maine. I mean, which is liberal, okay, but how about North Dakota or South Dakota? So.
James Madisonian balance of power. But I have a question for everyone here, or any of the panels.
May I interrupt just for a minute? I would like to show you another map. This is from 1952 election, just before the Civil Rights Movement. And Eisenhower won this election. And since Civil War till 1968, the South continuously voted for Democrats. That's very strange.
But these were
Southern Democrats. But they voted for Democrats because Civil War was fought by Abraham Lincoln, who was a Republican. And the Southern states, they never forgot this. And from 1860 till 1968 election, the Southern states voted for Democrats. And that map is very strange because if you look at the United States, the whole United States, except Southern states, voted for Republicans. Except the South, and they voted for Democrats. That's really strange. But that map changed dramatically in 1968.
I also think that Eisenhower would have been elected even if we were dead. I mean, he was just so popular that.
But South did not vote for
The
it.
Second World War coming direct. Second World War.
But I have a question that maybe we're over time, but just to think about, and that is, 2 parties is not in the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so why is it that the U.S. is so stable in terms of having a 2-party system for most of its history? It's just something to think about because you're not going to come to that answer very easily. But
As my comparative politics students,
yeah, I mean this is supported the stability of the U.S. political system more than anything else. There's been 2 parties. There's nothing in the Constitution about political parties.
But this political party is not a political party as in sense what we have in Turkey or in Europe. I mean, their structure and their system is totally different than. I mean, the system or the bureaucracy and the inputs of the elements of the. Yeah.
And also some comparative politics scholars, such as Duverger and others, they discuss the effect of election system on parties. I think that's close.
I mean, mostly stability comes from because of the Senate and the Senate and the House of Representatives rather than having a winner takes all system. Not because of the party system, I think so. Because because two-party system is not always bring the stability of a country for
But
a
it has,
country, but
it
it
just-
creates, it brings. I mean, if you look at the balance of power or so on so forth, theoretical perspective, yes, according to the balance of power theory, the bipolarity is always bring the stability, but it doesn't work.
But
And
this is a big difference from Europe, and a big difference
yeah,
from
for
Turkey.
sure, because of the
Well, there probably
foundations and
it could be a lot of factors. You know, I mean, certainly psychologically, the U.S. again is a very centrist country. You know, I mean, we, if I can speak for Americans, look out at the rest of the world and then look at ourselves. It's like the rest of the world and us.
that's
okay.
why Secretary of State.
Yeah, I mean, and if you listen very closely to what Americans say, you know, they'll talk about, or especially Romney talks about the rest of the world. Why aren't we strong? Why don't we have a big influence? And yeah. Yeah, we're too weak. We're too weak. That kind of stuff.
2 weeks ago, I was flying to Atlanta from DC, you know, a connection flight, or on my way back actually to Chicago, and there was a person sitting beside me, and we entered into a conversation. He asked me where I am from. I said from Turkey, and his first response, and that's very typical American response, is it okay over there? You know, so they consider we as Americans are all good, all okay, and you, the rest of the world, you know.
I get emails all the time.
Are you okay?
I get emails all the time. There's an uprising in Egypt. People send me emails. Are you all right? You're right. I mean, this is a serious mentality. Anyway.
I want to thank you to all for joining us today. I think we come to the end, and then thank you for your
Yeah, you can still do it,
thank
right?
you for joining us today. Hope to see you the next time.